Good evening, everyone. It's now 4 minutes past 6 o'clock. We will begin at 6:05. So for those who are joining us live on radio and television, and for those who need a countdown, the 60-second countdown starts now. Good evening and welcome to the Media Center here at the Office of the Prime Minister in Kingston, Jamaica. Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness will address the nation this evening. Joining him at the Media Center here are the following ministers. The Minister of Tourism, the Honorable Edmund Bartlett. The Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, the Honorable Carl Samuda. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Senator the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith. The Honorable Desmond McKenzie, the Minister of Local Government and Community Development, along with the Attorney General, Mrs. Marlene Malou Fort. We also have the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, Dr. Grace McLean, as well as the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Mr. Dunstan Bryan. Ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness.
Thank you, Naomi. Good evening, everyone. Let me especially acknowledge viewers joining us from overseas. Though we are grappling with the health and economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, the criminal threat continues. This morning, we all awoke to devastating news that 2 members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, the JCF, were shot and killed, and 2 other members seriously wounded in the line of duty. My heart goes out to their families, and my thoughts and prayers are with them. The entire Jamaica grieves with you. We will ensure that they get full support. The killing of a law enforcement officer while in the lawful conduct of his duty must be considered an attack on the state, an attack on our security and our sensibilities. It must not go unanswered. Otherwise, it will embolden those who are bent on spreading fear and promoting lawlessness. This morning, I had a meeting of the core of the National Security Council, where I was briefed by the Minister of National Security and the Commissioner of Police. Undoubtedly, this is a trying time for the JCF. However, the JCF is a professional organization, and they will not be deterred. As you would have already heard, the criminal suspected in the shooting was found. He confronted the police and was killed. Let me now turn to provide my usual update on the COVID-19 pandemic that has been such a great disruption for all. Let me start with our usual graphs, which should be on your screen displayed by now. The solid black line, which is now appearing, shows the cumulative number of cases. That is all cases since March 10th. Up to April 13th, we had 73 cases. Then we had a spike as a result of the workplace cluster with a steep climb up to May 2, when we reached 463 cases, of which 294 was as a result of the cluster. I keep repeating this as a graphic reminder of how rapid the virus can spread if personal responsibility is not exercised, protocols are not followed, and conditions are conducive to the spread of the virus. During this period, cases increased by more than 6-fold. After May 2, we returned to a flatter trajectory. As at yesterday, we had a total of 614 confirmed cases. Well, as of today, we had a total of 614 confirmed cases, and 336 are from the workplace cluster. Unfortunately, since our first case, we have had 10 deaths as depicted by the red line, which should now be appearing on your screen. The green line that you should now be seeing shows that we have had 408 persons confirmed as free from the virus after 2 negative test results. Our recovery rate, well, we're now 417. This was since yesterday. We've added more recoveries today, which now puts our recovery rate at approximately 68%. The blue line shows the number of active cases, that is the number of persons who still have the virus. Note that the blue line is trending upwards, which would have been expected as we increase the number of persons entering Jamaica under the controlled reentry program. It's a very slight upward trend. Now, the most important number we need to focus on is the number of persons hospitalized. As of today, we have 30 persons hospitalized. We also have an additional 79 persons isolated in a government facility and 92 isolated at home. The second graph shows the effect of the controlled reentry program on our numbers. The dashed purple line shows the number of cases, excluding the positive cases, from persons arriving under the controlled reentry program. You can see that our curve would have been virtually flat if we excluded those cases. We have seen how one single cluster can change our entire trajectory. As we configure our economy to new normal operations and welcoming Jamaicans as well as non-nationals starting June 15, there is clearly a risk of further spikes. Last week, we had done a simple projection of the numbers of cases that could result from the acceleration of the controlled reentry program based on all the persons who had been tested up to June 1. We're seeing approximately 2.5% of returning Jamaicans testing positive during that period. The black dashed line shows our existing trend, which is what we had projected as to likely be the case if we had brought in 10,000 persons up to the end of June. This line will act as a threshold or a trigger if our cumulative numbers start to trend above that line. Then we will have no choice but to consider tightening the measures. Between June 1 and yesterday, the number of new positive cases places us below the threshold. So you can see that the full black line is below what we had projected, and we would like to keep it that way. Returning Jamaicans and non-nationals need to bear in mind that if they are ill or exposed, they should respond truthfully and completely on the Jam COVID website or on the Visit Jamaica website, and therefore should not seek to travel at this time. The positive rate of incoming persons is one of the most important factors which is taken into consideration in our risk-based management approach to COVID-19. Anyone entering the island must observe faithfully and consistently all the measures in place. This will help our numbers to remain below the threshold for tightening up. I want to spend some time on providing an update on the controlled reentry program. The total number of Jamaicans who have returned under the program up to yesterday was 3,289. Of this total, 1,626 were repatriated via cruise ships and 1,633 by air. We have had 49, approximately 3% positive tests among those repatriated via cruise ship, and 26, approximately 1.6% positive among those returned by air. From the data so far, cruise ship workers represent a higher risk cohort than those returning by air. The low positive percentage, 1.6%, among those returning by air is encouraging and suggests that our Jamaicans overseas are taking the appropriate precautions to stay COVID-free. From June 1st up to yesterday, 989 persons would have landed. This is projected to reach 2,080 by Sunday, June 14, 2020. Challenges with flight arrangements and weather delays and rerouting would have impacted the target of 3,000 returning nationals during the period June 1 to 14. Nevertheless, we remain focused on bringing home our Jamaicans in a safe and convenient manner. We also have an additional 296 persons expected to arrive by sea between June 18th and 19th. Now, let me give you the latest numbers from the JAM COVID system. Our numbers have been growing. We now have 8,418 applications that have been approved. These persons are now free to make their bookings on any available flight. However, there are 1,355 applicants for which health and immigration authorities are awaiting the home quarantine assessment questions to be answered. We have sent out multiple emails reminding and asking for this information, and I am making a special appeal to these persons to provide it as soon as possible. We are not able to process your application without this information. Now, last week, I explained in detail the new risk-based protocols for controlled re-entry for the period June 1 to 14. I will now explain the protocols applicable for the period June 15 to 30th, which I had gone through in my last press conference, and indeed the press conference before that, and in a parliamentary presentation, but during this press conference, I will expound on it further. As announced previously, non-nationals will be allowed to enter Jamaica effective June 15, 2020. Now, when I say non-nationals, I am not only speaking of tourists, though that is what most people hear. There are many persons who are not Jamaican by passport, but have made Jamaica their home. Some hold work permits. Some are married to Jamaicans or are children of Jamaican parents or dependents otherwise. Consequently, as of June 15, our controlled re-entry program will become our controlled entry program. However, both nationals and non-nationals must obtain a travel authorization document in order to travel to Jamaica. We have set up two different portals for application for entry. Residents of Jamaica, being both nationals and non-nationals who are ordinarily resident in Jamaica, should apply to obtain a travel authorization on jamcovid.moh.gov.jm. This includes non-nationals who live here, as I've said before, as a result of holding a work permit, marriage, or being dependents of Jamaican nationals, or just living here over an extended period. Non-residents who are visiting Jamaica for tourism or business should apply on visitjamaica.com. The application process is the same, but the information requirements are slightly different. For example, for non-residents, the information for home quarantine assessment would not be required at this stage, as persons traveling for tourism will be staying at hotels or resorts defined in a resilient corridor under a stay-in-zone order. A travel authorization document from COVID-19 or visitjamaica.com is not required to book your flight to Jamaica. It is, however, a requirement for check-in and boarding, and the airlines will not allow passengers to board without presenting their travel authorization. All persons arriving in Jamaica will be subject to a health screening and a risk assessment by the health authorities. The health screening will include checking temperature, observation of symptoms, if any, as well as an interview by a health officer. The health authorities will make a risk assessment based on information obtained through this health screening, as well as consideration of certain factors, including the country and city of origin, travel history, and the living conditions at the home where you intend to stay in Jamaica. This risk assessment will determine the testing and quarantine requirements. All persons will also be required to go through a sensitization program that will advise them of the various infection prevention protocols within Jamaica, such as hand washing and sanitizing, wearing of masks, social distancing, the gathering restrictions, curfew hours, and so forth. The travel bubble countries, which we announced at the beginning of June, are considered by the health authorities to be low risk at this time. The travel bubble countries at this time comprise Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Barbados, the Cayman Islands, Grenada, Montserrat, St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Turks and Caicos Islands. Please note that this list of countries is subject to ongoing reassessment and could change at any time. Our risk-based testing and quarantine protocols differ among the following three categories of passengers. 1, Jamaican nationals and non-nationals ordinarily resident in Jamaica by virtue of work permit, marriage, or being a dependent of a national. 2, non-nationals visiting Jamaica for the purpose of tourism. And 3, non-nationals visiting Jamaica for business purposes. Now let me start with the first category, Jamaican nationals and non-nationals ordinarily resident in Jamaica. Now, these persons will be subject to testing if assessed as high risk as a result of their travel history, exhibiting symptoms, exposure to persons who have tested positive, or belonging to a high-risk group. High-risk groups include cruise ship workers, involuntarily returned migrants, and healthcare workers. Persons assessed as high risk will have their samples taken and await their test results under quarantine at home or in a government facility as determined by the health authorities. These persons will therefore be under quarantine until their test results are available, and we are aiming for a maximum of 72 hours to turn around test results. If the test result is negative, they will be under either a stay-at-home for returning residents measure or be placed in quarantine at home for 14 days, depending on the assessed risk. If the test is positive, however, persons will be isolated either at home or in a government facility as determined by the health authorities. Persons not assessed as high risk will be allowed to go home under the stay-at-home for returning residents measure for 14 days since being landed in Jamaica. Now, the stay-at-home for returning residents measure that we are introducing under the new order is more restrictive than the stay-at-home measure for persons aged 65 and over, which would have previously obtained. Now, under the new stay-at-home order for returning persons, such persons are required to stay at home. However, they are allowed to leave their home only once per day to obtain food, medical supplies, conduct financial transactions, and physical exercise. It is important to note that persons under this measure would also be required to work from home. And at this point, I have to emphasize, because there are persons who are coming back on work permits and who would want to immediately return to the workplace. It should be noted that under the new stay-at-home measures for returning persons, they must stay at home, follow the guidelines about once leaving, but they must also work from home. Now, moving on to non-nationals visiting Jamaica for tourism. So non-national tourists will be subject to testing if they are assessed as high risk, either as a result of coming from countries designated as high risk for COVID-19 transmission based on classifications by the World Health Organization, or due to other risk factors such as exhibiting symptoms, exposure to persons, or coming from a high-risk group. Persons assessed as high risk would have their samples taken at the airport or other designated facility and await their test results at their hotel or resort under the stay-in-zone measure. If the test is negative, they would remain under the stay-in-zone measure. If the test is positive, however, they would be isolated, either at the hotel resort or in a government facility as determined by the health authorities. Persons not assessed as high risk will be allowed to go to their hotel resorts under the stay-in-zone measure. This means they are required, for the duration of their stay in Jamaica, to remain within the COVID-19 resilient corridor, a defined geographical area from Negril to Portland along the main road. Only hotels and resort cottages, as defined in the Tourist Board Act, and which are licensed under that act and then certified by the TPDCO, will be allowed to open during the period June 15 to 30, 2020. The certified establishments are to adhere to the protocols as in the COVID-19 Ministry of Tourism and Health safety protocols for the Jamaican tourism sector for the year 2020. The final category is that of non-nationals visiting Jamaica for business purposes. All non-nationals visiting Jamaica for business purposes for less than 14 days will be required to be tested at the airport or other designated facility. They will then await their test results under quarantine at their hotel or intended address. If the test is positive, they would be isolated, either at their hotel or intended address, or in a government facility as determined by the health authorities. If the test is negative, they would be released from quarantine and therefore free to conduct their businesses. They must, however, adhere to all measures for controlling the risk of spread that are in place, such as hand sanitizing, wearing of masks, following the curfew hours, and the gathering restrictions. Now, non-nationals visiting Jamaica for business purposes for 14 days or more will be subject to the same testing and quarantine protocols as described earlier for non-nationals who are ordinarily resident in Jamaica. It is important to note that persons who are quarantined or placed in isolation at home may be geofenced and monitored electronically through the Jam COVID app and by the health authorities to ensure that they do not leave home. This will not apply under the stay at home for returning residents or the stay-in-zone measures. Now I want to turn to some other measures. As I had indicated in the last press conference, there would not be many new measures, and I will therefore only highlight the new measures. I have already gone through the controlled entry protocols in details, and of course, these will be reflected in the new order. Now, last week we announced beaches, and I've gotten many messages saying, thanks, Prime Minister, for opening the beaches. That's not my doing. The truth is that it is the people who have followed the rules, followed the protocols, who have been faithful in the observation that have made it possible. The government of Jamaica is only acting based upon how the people of Jamaica are acting responsibly. So we have to put in place the measures that are commensurate with the responsibility demonstrated by the people. So if we're not seeing high compliance, then we have to tighten the restrictions. If people are complying, then that gives us a little bit more room. So I think that the people of Jamaica, by virtue of their observance of the rules, following the protocols, these are some measures that we find that we could put in place. However, just to say very quickly, if people stop following the rules, the numbers start to go the wrong way, then we have to tighten the measures. So the measures relating to the use of beaches remain through to June 30th, although it is to be noted that we have strengthened the protocols. Beaches are now required to be marked with flags, signs, cones, or ropes to help to space people out for appropriate physical distancing requirements. Zoos, theme parks, river rafting, and gyms. Now, we didn't necessarily close gyms, but we have now put in some new protocols for that, which the Minister of Local Government will explain. For zoos, theme parks, and river rafting, from June 15th to 30th, there will be a reopening of zoos, theme parks, and river rafting. These, as a result of that, the Ministry of Local Government will be explaining what the new protocols are for those. We continue to exercise a risk management approach to ensure that our state resources are not overwhelmed and remain in a position to provide the best response to protect and save lives. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I now invite the Minister of Local Government to give the update on the new measures, and then I will ask the Minister of Health to give his general overview on the numbers.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Just quickly running through the new measures as it relates to the operation of the protocols surrounding gyms. The opening hours for gym is from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily. Only 50% of the full capacity will be accommodated at any point in time. We are expecting that the full protocols that are outlined by the Ministry of Health will be observed. We are asking that persons attending the gym will bring their own towels and mats and other personal use. We are requiring that gym operators put in the necessary sanitation mechanism once the equipment are used. And we are urging that there is a period between operations within the gyms. So we are saying from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., and we are asking that persons take their own personal equipment to the gym, and that the social distancing is observed and the protocols laid out by the Ministry of Health. We are also moving to open theme parks and zoos across the country. There are 26 such establishments throughout the country. The similar protocol where only 50% of the full capacity will be allowed at any time. The protocol governing the use must be placed, so we are ensuring that proper signage be established in all locations. Temperature check must be done for all guests and staff on entrance to the facility. Each facility must put in place sanitization stations for the proper washing of hands and physical distancing. We are asking that rails and barriers, as well as safety areas, must be sanitized regularly during the opening of these facilities. Everyone in the zoo and theme park is expected to wear a mask, that is including guests and members of staff. 6-foot marking must be placed in each area where patrons need to line up, and we are emphasizing that no areas for playing where rides are available, and I want to make the point that all of those facilities will be closed. The only activities that will take place in the theme park and the zoo is the viewing of animals, and guests will not be permitted to touch the animals. And all doors and windows in the exhibition area must remain open. And that is the protocol for the reopening of zoos and theme parks, which will take effect come next week. Last protocol on the question of rafting. There's around approximately 157 rafters in 2 major rafting areas of the country, in the Rio Grande, in Portland, and in Martha Brae, in Trelawney. Rafting will commence on a daily basis from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Again, the usual signage must be placed on the entrance to the facilities. Temperature checks must be done, the wearing of masks. The raft captains and rafters must wear masks at all times. Each facility must put in place sanitation stations for the proper washing of hands and maintenance of sanitation protocols as set out by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. 6-foot marking must be placed in areas where patrons need to enter, restrooms and concession stands. Raft captains must be at least 6 feet away from their passengers. Only two guests plus the raft captain must be on each raft. Only persons visiting from the same family or group must be allowed on the raft together. Life vests must be washed each day, and the necessary sanitation protocol be introduced. Ladies and gentlemen, these measures are for 2 weeks and will be assessed on a daily basis, and based on these assessments, we will make further recommendations as to the activities of those 3 new areas that I've announced. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Mackenzie. I now invite Minister Tufton to give his overview.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, colleagues. So, as said by the Prime Minister, the last 24 hours we've seen 3 additional cases of COVID-19, so 3 positives, and this brings the total to 614. 9 additional recoveries, which is quite good, are continuing the trend of more recoveries than positive cases, bringing the overall recovery rate to 67.9%, or 417. The new cases were cases that came into the island, 2 on a flight from Canada and 1 on a flight coming in from the United States. And the new cases are comprised of a 22-year-old male, 22 and 53-year-old males, and 1 31-year-old female, with addresses in Kingston and St. Andrews, St. Catherine, and St. Mary. So we continue to see a rise in the number of imported cases, now standing at 113. In addition, 209 cases are contacts of confirmed cases. 39 are local transmission cases not epidemiologically linked. 236 are related to the workplace cluster in St. Catherine, and 7 under investigation. There are currently 2 critically ill positive cases that the health team continue to monitor and treat, and we certainly hope for their recovery. And the total number of persons, 187, or 30.5% active cases that are under investigation. So 187 active under investigation, 2 critically ill. The gender difference between the cases are 355, or 57.8% of confirmed cases are females, and 259, or 42.2 males. And of course, the ages range from the very young 2 months to 87 years. In terms of testing, the numbers are now at 15,850, following the testing of 372 new samples over the last 24 hours. In addition to this 614 positives, there are 15,191 negatives and 45 pending. So those are the routine numbers that we put out each day. And I think in terms of a general summary, we're encouraged by the numbers of low positives, the increasing numbers of recoveries. We will continue to monitor to manage the critically ill, and we have 2 of those. The rest are just under observation. I wanted to just, in closing, say that the health team have been monitoring the numbers coming in on the uncontrolled flights, as elaborated on by the Honorable Prime Minister, to determine the extent to which we are discovering positive cases. As you know, all these persons are sampled and tested. The 1.6% positives coming in, just under 1,000 or so persons since June 1, coming from the US primarily, which represents, based on WHO standards, a high-risk jurisdiction based on the spread of the virus, is encouraging to us. It does tell us that the rate of infection, if you will, among our Jamaicans or nationals coming in is low, and it is going to form in the next few days part of an assessment as to how we proceed over the next week and beyond. As the Prime Minister had indicated, these measures are fluid in terms of the risk assessment. They are risk-based, and so we will adjust based on the advice of the medical team and based on the results that we're getting. We feel that it was very important to test all these individuals, not just from the standpoint of discovering the positive cases, but very importantly, to use the data. And when you have an unusual occurrence, a public health unusual occurrence, in this case a novel virus, it is very important in terms of standardizing procedures going forward in the future that we begin by collecting as much data as possible and then assessing the data to determine clinical definitions and also to determine standard protocols in terms of how we manage these cases going forward in the future. So it may not be necessary And at some point, it won't be necessary, I should say, let me be more definitive, to test everyone coming in. But in the initial stages, from a clinical perspective and based on the analysis that is needed in order to manage a process and to establish that process, that kind of data is absolutely critical. And I just want to say, therefore, that 1.6% is encouraging because it tells us that in a high-risk jurisdiction, as defined by the WHO, we are not as bad, certainly in terms of those coming in who are Jamaicans, based on the tests that we have done, as some may think. And that may require or influence some adjustments. The same would be the case for the non-nationals that the Prime Minister spoke to coming in on the 15th. Initially, you start by trying to get as much data as possible for the protection of those individuals, for the protection of your local population, but very importantly, to influence the clinical approach over time in terms of determining what's the best approach to deal with that. And that's why it's so important to capture all of the processes using testing and other screening methods, and then from there make a determination as to how we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Tufton. I'll now invite the Minister of Tourism, who will give us an update on our preparedness to receive visitors in the designated COVID-19 resilient corridor. Minister of Tourism, Edmund Bartlett.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Colleagues, all ladies and gentlemen, the Ministry of Tourism has, of course, been pursuing the development of activities towards the phase opening of the tourism industry in Jamaica on the basis of 5 critical pillars. The first, of course, is to develop a robust health security protocol that will withstand local and international scrutiny. And that we have done, and we have done very well, to the point that the World Travel and Tourism Council and other international tourism bodies have acclaimed our protocol, and in one instance have given the seal of safe travel a signature designation which only Jamaica has to date in the Caribbean. The second is the training of all sectors to manage the protocols and the new behavioral patterns moving forward. And that we have done. Over 7,000 workers have been trained in 11 disciplines online. And more than 4,000 have already been certified in the process. And in the last week, training specific for the opening exercises, some 13,000 workers were trained online and 1,000 on a face-to-face basis in the different locations across the island. The third is strategies around COVID security infrastructure, and that related to PPEs, masks, infrared machines, and generally to enable the industry to become conversant and familiar with these critical, what are now being called COVID security infrastructure. That is a feature of destination preparedness all across the globe. And I'm pleased to indicate that the properties that we have visited, and indeed the TPDCO, which has the responsibility for the COVID assessment of properties across Jamaica, and more specifically in the resilient corridor, which I'll speak about in a minute, they have been to more than 76 properties, and we're satisfied that the certificate that will be issued will indeed indicate a readiness at a high level to receive visitors into our country. The fourth pillar was communication with our local and international partners about reopening. And we have had extensive communications with our immediate partners. We've had a number of Zoom meetings, webinars, discussions, and consultations. Indeed, it began with the establishment of the COVID Reform and Restoration Committee, and then the COVID Security Risk Management Committee, consisting of all partners, some 34 of them in all, and constant meeting to look at various elements of our requirements towards the date when we would reopen. Only today, we had 1,200 partners across the world in a webinar meeting. Every tour operator, every travel agent, and every airline, every single partner we have touched base with to explain the protocols that we have established and indeed to indicate what the reentry protocols are. And finally, a staggering approach to the reopening and the managing of risk in a very structured way. These 5 protocols in relation to how we have managed the process leading up to the opening, which is going to be on the 15th, are recognized, realized, and indeed appreciated, and in fact, lauded by a number of international partners and our local partners. Prime Minister, the establishment of the COVID resilience corridor, I must say, is the first such designation in any country in the world. And we have also had responses from the International Committee from the UNWTO, of which I am a member. Jamaica is a member in this regard. And Prime Minister, we are very pleased that the preparations within that corridor, which starts from Negril, embracing the entire Negril area, and at Orange Bay, at the bridge by Orange Bay, it then merges to take the seaward side of the Norman Manley Highway and then continues through Lucy to Montego Bay. And at Montego Bay, at the intersection of Howard Cook Boulevard and Gloucester Avenue and Queens Drive, it takes Queens Drive onto Sunset Boulevard at the roundabout. At Sunset Boulevard, it goes right along Flankers Main Road through Rose Hall into Falmouth, as you see across there, and all the way into Ocho-Rios, where it takes, again, the development road in Ocho-Rios, which would embrace the township of Ocho-Rios, and continues all the way into Port Antonio, Prime Minister. This corridor offers us an enormous capacity to manage the space and to be able to trace and follow all the visitors who would come within that area. The good news, in fact, overall is that, Prime Minister, this area constitutes about 85% of the assets of the industry. So the visitor who comes is likely to have as good a time as he could hope to have in this first phase of our opening. Finally, I just want to indicate, Prime Minister, that the flights scheduled for the period, there are 70 flights that are scheduled for the 2-week period, and we have some 13,900 seats that will realize somewhere in the region of 6,000 to 7,000 visitors over the period. A quiet start, but a solid start. And we are excited by the fact that Jamaica will make the statement that it must and continue to be the preferred destination for discerning and discriminating visitors. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Bartlett. I'll ask the Minister of National Security to make a brief statement, followed by the Commissioner of Police, who is with us on today's gruesome killing of 2 of our hardworking policemen. Minister Chan.
Thank you, Prime Minister, colleagues, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all those listening in radio land and TV land. This morning's gruesome murder of Jamaica Constable Force officers, Detective Corporal Dane Biggs and Constable Ricardo Hilton, and the severe wounding of 2 others, including a senior member of the force, is nothing short of a brazen affront by criminals armed with high-powered weapons on society. I wish to express my sincere condolences to the families and loved ones of those fallen officers who gave the ultimate in service to the people of Jamaica. My prayers are with the officers who are gravely wounded and are battling for their lives. I know the medical team is working assiduously and will do what it takes to provide them with the best care available. To the men and women of the Jamaica Constable Force, I want to assure you of my support and my solidarity during this time of pain and bereavement. Even though your hearts are aching from the tragic and painful loss, I know that you are even more motivated and committed and determined to combat crime and criminality in our country. At this time, I invite 60 seconds of silence in memory of the 2 fallen officers in their duty. Stand. May their soul rest in peace. Thank you. This wanton attack on the police must be understood to be an attack on all of us as a society. Every well-thinking Jamaican, every person who loves the country should strongly condemn these criminal acts. We must all be outraged, heartbroken, and unaccepting of this kind of response to the police. While these criminals may have felt emboldened to attack the police in this way, I want to assure the public that this tragedy will not deter or distract the work of the security forces. This morning operation in Horizon Park was a result of quality, actionable intelligence gathered by the proactive intelligence unit of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. They were there because of the quality of the details they had, and they were correct. This speaks to the effectiveness of the police in carrying out their investigation and following the evidence, even when it leads to residential areas that are not traditionally associated with criminal elements, as such as Horizon Park. This demonstrates an elevated level of policing that is now characterizing the police force. But criminals have no rules, and so while the police officers may be mindful of their professional standards, have to be mindful of their professional standards, citizens' right while carrying out such operations, the criminals who infest our communities and plague our citizens are oftentimes feared and shoot with impunity wherever they are. They are brutal in their activity. Today is a tragic day for Jamaica, but the men and women of the security forces are resolute and will continue to put pressure on the criminals. The government stands in the support of the security forces and will continue to provide the financial, legislative, and other policy support measures for them to carry out their duties effectively. And I invite the Commissioner of Police to update on the operational aspects.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Prime Minister, for this opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I think before I get into some of the operational details about what happened this morning, how we lost 2 of our officers to violence this morning. I think I need to set a context and a backdrop to how we and where we police. I think it's a backdrop of a virus of violence that has infected us for some time. And it's probably appropriate that at a COVID press conference that this matter of violence and it being a virus be raised. We have killers and gangs who have kept communities in fear for a long time. 22 years ago, the country, for the first time, had 1,000 homicides in a year. For the last 16 years, we have been above 1,000 homicides. Now, we're in a unique position as the police because we are the only group, the only people in Jamaica who see every single one of those homicides. We're always there. We always respond. So we don't have the luxury of seeing the deaths of our people as a statistic, because it's not. It's very real to us, and that's what motivates, and that's what drives our members to go out every day, every night, to keep the people of Jamaica as safe as they can within the capacity that we have. I was in West Kingston a few nights ago, sometime after midnight, where you actually had a shooting involving some of our members. We saw a part of a market burned down, lit by a gang. And these gangs have been there for a while, and we have taken very specific action against them, and we will continue to do so, to continue to degrade their capacity and their ability to do these things. But in the meantime, they are very determined to destroy lives and to destroy livelihoods. And that is really, in brief, the context in which we find ourselves policing. Specifically this morning, at about 5 o'clock, the team, based on intelligence, as the minister had said earlier, went to a community of Horizon Park in Spanish Town, St. Catherine. We had what was some quality intelligence that there would be men there with weapons. A team of 11 police officers went there. And as is our protocol, when we get intelligence that persons with guns or gunmen or killers are somewhere, we still have to approach it to confirm that the intelligence we have is accurate. We have to be measured in what we do. Those officers just can't go in there with their guns blazing. They have to knock, they have to announce their presence. And that gives the other people an opportunity to open fire on us. And that's what they did, using automatic fire on the first 2 officers and then subsequently on another group. The perpetrator that escaped, leaving a M16 automatic rifle and a couple of magazines behind. And we've had a number of follow-up operations that led us to various premises where we gathered more information and intelligence on where they might be. Eventually found at least one of them in Corville Gardens, where on trying to apprehend him, he managed to graze one of our officers, and another officer got some bullet fragments in him before we managed to kill him and recover the weapon he was using. this could be any given day of our policing, but it happened to be today. And I have to thank, really, all the people who expressed their support and also gave information to us that we could follow up as quickly as we did. And it really speaks to the benefit of what public support can do for us in policing. Once we're getting that support, it allows us to respond quicker. It allows us to make much better use of the resources we have. So this is a tragic day for us as a force, and I have to express condolences to the families of those downed officers, and certainly on behalf of the entire JCF, to those families, Corporal Biggs and Constable Hilton, who served our country for 10 years and 4 years respectively. Both officers gave really good service over the period that they served. And, you know, we have a way in life of eulogizing those people who have passed. This is not the case. They were actually really good police officers. And we no longer have their benefit, or the benefit of their experience and service. We certainly will do all we can as a force to support the families. We still have 2 members being treated for their injuries, particularly a superintendent who got shot. He's been in surgery, in and out of surgery for a while, since this morning. Fortunately, he's still with us. And, you know, the doctors, the teams of doctors are doing all they can, thanks, to support us and to get the superintendent through, and hopefully he will survive this. So certainly to all of my members, to every member of the JCF, we must use this to bring us together, and we must be resolute from it in our commitment to our duties and to the wider public, to Jamaica, and to our members. We will remain unified in our purpose and focus. We will continue to respond to and protect the people of Jamaica. And we will not allow criminals to destroy the lives and livelihoods of Jamaicans as long as we are here as the Jamaica Constabulary Force. We'll continue to show respect. We'll continue to obey the rule of law. But one thing is certain, we'll continue to be that force for good that people rely on in communities when there are no cameras and when there's no one else there. It's only us and the community. And we've been emphasizing that and re-emphasizing that. And that's why we're going to fix this problem that I described at the beginning together. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Minister of National Security. All right, the Minister of Education is with us, and he has a very brief update on happenings in that sector.
You know, Prime Minister, I thought you were more intimidated by the Minister of Finance. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the entire ministry and on behalf of every well-wishing Jamaican, I'd like to associate ourselves with the sentiments expressed in respect of the horrific, murderous acts that took place early this morning. I'm going to give a very brief update, Prime Minister, on the reopening of schools. Approximately 74,000 students are registered to sit CSET and CAPE examinations. School reopened on June the 8th and will continue until July the 3rd to facilitate preparation for the examinations. In terms of the preparation, a manual was prepared for schools to guide their preparedness for students returning to the classroom. School leaders participated in a rigorous virtual training exercise with the Ministry of Health, who, as I said last week, were extremely helpful. The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information provided the necessary support to enable schools to sensitize the children, teachers, and to sanitize ahead of the reopening. We also provided items such as infrared thermometers, masks, and disinfectants to the schools. Inspections were carried out to ensure schools are adhering to the protocols established. There were some minor glitches, however, as you would well expect, because we keep emphasizing that we're trying our best to get it right, but we won't get everything right. But I can say confidently that through the leadership of the Permanent Secretary, Dr. McLean, the Chief Education Officer, Dr. Troop, and other members of staff, including Ms. Chin, who is here, we have been able to have what I would regard as a very successful week. The large number of students that we anticipated has really not been at the level anticipated, because just as we had indicated, many of the students had been prepared to write their examinations. And I'll just give you a brief overview on exactly what has been the outcome. But the teachers are up to the task and has stood in the breach and are leading by example. They are wearing their masks. They're doing everything that the Ministry of Health has commanded them to do. Every entrance to the school has been checked, and the temperature checks are ongoing. Schools have installed hand washing stations. They have spaced out furniture to adhere to the physical distancing required in the classrooms. They have placed markers on the floors to guide the students during the course of the day. Signs have been placed reminding students and teachers to practice good hand hygiene, about proper mask etiquette, and the need for physical distancing, which incidentally poses one of our greatest challenges as we prepare for the opening of school in September. We have had some reports that students are so excited to see their friends that they broke the rules, embracing, hugging, kissing, as expected. However, this is not a widespread problem, and our schools have put measures in place to deal with this, and I'm happy to announce that it has settled down considerably. We urge that parents also discuss this matter with their children, because a lot of what we do is dependent on the behavior and the actions taken by the children, the parents of the children. On June the 8th, 2020, approximately 25,000 students reported to school, and that is just but a third of the amount that actually are eligible. Attendance has varied daily as schools have been staging the days that the students actually come in to be refreshed, really. It's like a refresher course. It's like prepping them for the exams. This is being done to ensure physical distancing. It also allows schools an opportunity to focus attention on the particular subjects and groups at different times. Remember, they are not all prepared in all the subjects in a manner that they ought to be. So there are selected subjects that are attended to separately. It is also important to remember that schools have reported different levels of preparedness for the exams. The majority of schools have either completed or almost completed their preparation. This means that some schools have all their exam students attending school. Others don't. They don't feel that it's necessary. Some have contributed to engage virtually. And Prime Minister and folks, let me just explain that virtual learning, distance learning, is something that's going to be with us for a very long time. Arguably, it may be with us for the foreseeable future because of the physical demands if we are going to maintain any kind of social distancing. Based on the agreed schedule with students and parents, only approximately 10 to 12,000 students are being physically engaged daily across the system. The sitting of candidates per subject range from a low of 183 to 34,661. And the subjects that attract the largest number is maths and English. In maths, we have 34,700, and in English language, 33,400. The preparation for the start of the new school year, because this is really an appetizer. The new school year is where the challenge is really going to be presented. So what we are doing now is a practice run, essentially. Research has been done and data has been collected. We have identified all available spaces for our students, and in many instances we have identified churches which will be engaged in this partnership. Partnerships are being established with the private institutions to accommodate some of our students. Schools have started to develop their own individual plan for reopening, and we collaborate with them and we guide them in every way we can after looking at their plans. These plans are to be submitted in 2 weeks, and the final plan for implementation will be available in the first week of July. Prime Minister, I just want to end by saying, when I was here last, I seem to have said something that upset some young members of the ministry, students in particular, and associations. Well, I am happy to announce that today I had a very successful meeting with all the representatives of the various organizations and unions. And I think it is fair to say, from my part, and I think the same applies to them, it was a very constructive, informative session. The only thing that may be of concern to your Prime Minister is that their demands will require a little more money. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Samuda. I think that brings to the end this section of the press conference. We're now open to questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Earlier, we did a test run with members of the media to ensure that, of course, technically we are sound, and the instructions concerning ensuring that their background has no distracting elements, and, of course, that their microphones are turned on once we call on them, and so I expect that the same will be done at this time. Our first question then will come from Ms. Janet Silvera. Janet, good evening.
Good evening, Prime Minister.
Good evening, Janet.
Good evening, all. My question is in relation to visitors coming in, non-Jamaican nationals. I'm not sure. Yesterday, we were told that they will be tested all persons coming into Jamaica. Today, I'm hearing they will be assessed. Just want to be clear on that. If you could give me some clarity as it relates to that. And this one is to Minister Bartlett. How are we going to ensure that persons remain in the corridors? What methods will be put in place to ensure persons do not go outside of the corridors?
Thank you, Janet, for those two questions. Let me just say that we well understand that given the anticipation, both for Jamaicans coming in and for Jamaicans at home, for the opening of the tourism industry, that there could be misunderstanding of the positions that we have put in the public domain. But just to be clear, we have always been consistent in what we have said, and at these press conferences we go through a very, I want to say robust presentation of the facts. So we've been doing this now since the 1st of June, and we also explain in Parliament. And our position has always been that we will do a risk-based assessment to inform our testing protocols. Now, for a visitor, a tourist, as you would define them, a non-Jamaican visiting Jamaica for the purpose of tourism, these persons would go through a screening exercise. Everyone coming into Jamaica goes through a screening exercise. That screening exercise has two elements to it. The first element is screening by taking the temperature and observing symptoms. The second element is the risk assessment, and that will be gathered from the information provided on your application to re-enter Jamaica. It will be provided by an interview process, questions that we ask you. It will also be informed by your country or place of origin and your travel history. It will be informed, for example, by exposures that you have had, or whether or not you are part of some high-risk groups that would require us now to take an elevated assessment of you. Now, after going through that assessment process, if you have a temperature, you will be tested, whether you're a Jamaican or a non-Jamaican, a tourist, a business visitor. If you have symptoms, you will be tested, whether you're a Jamaican, a tourist, non-Jamaican resident, whatever, you will be tested. If you go through the assessment for risk and we see that you have a travel history, you are coming from a country that is deemed a country of high risk, you will be tested. So far, we have employed this protocol, and we will employ this protocol on the 15th to the 30th. So if you are a tourist coming from, let's say, New York, or anywhere in the United States for that matter, and you come to Jamaica, you will go through our assessment program, our assessment protocols here, and you will be tested, because the United States would form part of those countries that are considered high risk by the World Health Organization, as is the entire North America and most of South America. Most countries in the Caribbean region would have, by virtue of how they have conducted their health management protocol, their epidemic management protocols, would not necessarily be considered high risk. And therefore, we have to make sure, Jamaica, that we maintain that status. So, to be clear, tourists coming in from countries that are high risk will be tested between the 15th and the 30th of June, at which time we will examine our protocols to see what is the positive rate that we get. And if the positive rate is low and other factors are put into consideration, then we can make a determination as to what we do with testing. But from now to the 15th, from the 15th rather to the 30th, all persons will come into Jamaica. They will go through a screening process. That screening process will inform whether or not they are tested. We can say that anyone coming from a country that is high risk will be thrown up as such in our screening process and therefore will be tested. So just to be clear, the Minister of Tourism, I gather, yesterday in a press conference said all tourists coming in between the 15th and 30th will be tested. If they're coming from the United States, if they can come from Canada, if they're coming from any country that is high risk. And the truth is that 95% of the people who would visit Jamaica during this period anyway would be coming from a country that is high risk. But our policy has always been, it has not varied. There is no reversion or change or anything like that. If you look back at all the press conferences that we have had, Janet, if you look at what we have said in Parliament, everything that we have published, that has been the case, that it is risk-based and the risk assessment will inform the testing. But to the comfort of everyone who feels that we're going to allow people in and not test, the protocol is such that we will probably be testing more than 90% of the people who come in. And then Minister Bartlett.
The resilient corridor is a geographically defined area which would have all the properties that would have been assessed and would have been adjudged to be able to provide almost all the requirements that the visitor would need to have during their stay for those 2 weeks. As a consequence, it becomes easier for us to manage. It's easy because the hotels literally define what happens, who is there, where they go, and because we have also developed a program for the ground transportation arrangements that will also move in a defined way, we will be able to keep a very close tab on all the visitors who come within those areas. The indications are that the properties that are going to be open anyway are all within that corridor at this time. And therefore, we are satisfied that we will be able to manage the movement within that area and to account for the activities of all our visitors within that space.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, our next question comes from Ms. Dion Jackson Miller from the RJR Group, fresh from her birthday earlier this week.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Naomi.
Happy belated birthday, Dion. I didn't know. Otherwise, I would have sent you a card.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. I appreciate that. Now, in relation to the announcement, okay, there's a curfew in place, as we know, and protocols for how businesses should operate, distancing, and so on. Why suddenly decide to impose opening requirements on gyms instead of just having them work according to the curfew hours and the various protocols, especially since that's one business that people actually do visit early, and most of them have been opening 5 or shortly after 5 in accordance with curfew. So that's one question. Second, I have to tell you, I'm now completely confused in relation to what the situation is with visitors coming in. It sounds as if you're saying that both what you said and what Mr. Bartlett said are both correct, and they don't sound as if they can be. So can you clarify that? Because it doesn't sound from what you said that everybody is going to be tested, which is what Mr. Bartlett said yesterday. So I'm going to have to ask for a little bit more clarity on that point. And third, what happens if a visitor comes here and then comes down with COVID-19 and wants to go back home? What happens?
Thank you for those questions, Dion. I'm going to ask the Minister of Tourism to join me. But let me again run through the protocols. I think most people get what we're saying, that if you are visiting Jamaica, whether you are a tourist, whether you are a non-Jamaican resident here, whether you're visiting for business, you will go through a screening exercise. That screening exercise, as of the 15th, will do two things. One, we will check for symptoms. Particularly, we will be doing temperature checks. If from that assessment, we see that you should be tested, if you have a temperature or you're showing symptoms, you will be tested. We will also do a risk assessment of your history, that is your travel history, your country of origin. We will also look at where you're coming to stay in Jamaica if you are a non-national resident or a Jamaican. We will look at the risk group that you're coming from. Several factors will inform the risk profile, and if your risk profile comes out as high, you will be tested. Now, one factor that determines a high-risk profile is the country from which you are coming. The WHO gives us a good guide of countries where there is significant spread, enough to concern us that this is high risk. As it stands now, the United States and most of South America are considered high-risk countries. Most countries in Europe are considered high risk. We get more than 90% of our tourism from North America, Europe, and a very small amount coming from South America. In any event, remember, Dion, we are in a period of controlled entry. So we determine who gets to come in to the island by virtue of asking persons to register. We ask them questions relating to their health, and from that we are able to already start the risk assessment of those coming in. So we control the entry of persons coming in. So in any event, even before the person arrives in Jamaica, we already have started to develop a risk profile. Now, everyone coming in from the 15th to the 30th, therefore, will, as I said, go through this assessment. If the assessment says you are high risk or you are showing symptoms, you will be tested. So therefore, Dion, almost all persons coming in from the United States will be tested, whether they are coming as tourists, whether they are coming as business visitors, or whether they are coming as Jamaicans. We will test high-risk persons. And I think by virtue of that, I think Minister Bartlett's statement that everyone coming in will be tested, that's the easier interpretation. Minister Bartlett, you want to speak on the other matter?
Which was the other matter? What was the other question there?
If a tourist comes in and
test positive. Okay.
Yes, and wants to go home, what happens? Do we have to?
If I think the protocols were announced that they would be then either quarantined at the hotel where they are, or they would go into a public facility. But we're going beyond that, because as part of the response, we are now discussing with insurance companies and an international logistics company which does repatriation of individuals and or properties that have undergone disruptions or disasters. And that company is in the process of working through with us so that when visitors come and they test positive, they can in fact have the coverage to be repatriated to their homes. So this is an important response that Jamaica is, again, the first country that is working on to ensure that visitors who have been tested positive can have an opportunity to go back home without the airlines taking a position, because as you know, the commercial airlines wouldn't readily take a passenger who is tested positive for COVID.
Just to be clear, Dion, because it's important, and I'm glad you're asking the questions because there might be confusion in the minds of other persons. Testing depends on capacity. And remember now, we can control the capacity that is coming in. And that is why we have this process of registering on Jam COVID. So we can bring the capacity, that is our resources to test, in line with those who we give the approval to enter. And that is why we can make the commitment that we are making that during this period, from the 15th to the 30th, we would be able to test almost all coming in. And that almost all is qualified by those who have been screened and assessed as high risk, bearing in mind that the WHO and other factors that we are considering automatically defines persons coming from North America, some countries in South America, some countries in Europe as high risk for spread.
So many people are also waiting on the gym questions.
Oh, the gym, Minister Mackenzie, the question is why now impose restrictions on gyms? We had given guidance to gyms before, but I certainly would have gotten many notes, what are we doing about the gyms? And the Minister of Local Government assessed and gave his pronouncements today.
Yes, Prime Minister. As you rightly said, we did not impose any protocols at the beginning, but based on a number of concerns that were raised, we thought it was important, and we have done tests on certain establishments before we took the decision. And you must remember that also we have to ensure that the capacity is not overloaded and that persons are given adequate time to go home before the commencement of the curfew. We have put this in place for 2 weeks. At the end of the 2 weeks, if we see the kind of response that is necessary, then we can reassess and make a further determination. But it is a part of the protocol that we have put in place for all establishments that the public are exposed to.
Thank you, Minister. Prime Minister, just before we go to Mr. Damon Mitchell of the Gleaner Company, there are a few questions as well concerning what's happening with aquatic centers and pools. We've loosened some of the arrangements, but not pools. Why, sir?
So everything, again, as I said, is risk-based. You know, pools and aquatic centers, many of them require, are enclosed spaces. Many of them are in small spaces relative to beaches and rivers. And we are not yet at that point where we believe we can take that risk just yet. Remember now, we're doing many things in this window. We're bringing in our Jamaicans. We're bringing in tourists. We're opening back rafting. We're opening back parks. We have open rivers. I think we don't want to take, all of these are risks, and we're just taking, I think we have reached our limit in taking the risks. We need to assess, and then come July 1, we are in a better position to understand the impact of these actions on our numbers, and then we'll be able to look at other measures. But I think, you know, we have, where we are now, I think we have expanded as far as we can in terms of reopening certain activities.
Thank you, sir. Let's then go over to Mr. Mitchell, the Gleaner.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Prime Minister, I have 3 questions for the Commissioner. I'll ask 2 now and ask the third after the Commissioner's responses. Commissioner?
Yes.
Well, first of all, my condolences on the loss of your cops. But can you just indicate for me how chronic is this issue of shortage of bulletproof vests in the Jamaica Constabulary Force? That's question 1. And question 2, can you explain the current system to ensure that only viable bulletproof vests are in use by your members?
Okay, firstly, there is not a chronic shortage of bulletproof vests. We brought in thousands of vests of different types into the country in recent times. Most, if not all, officers have a vest or should have. The other question was the viability of the vests. Well, so bulletproof vests have different ratings. So some of them are level 3A vests. That will stop everything up to a .44 Magnum. For rifle rounds and jacketed bullets, it goes up to level 3 and level 4. For level 4 vests, they will stop most anything that is from a relatively small caliber rifle. So that's the range of vests. As you get more protection in these vests, it gets heavier and heavier. And obviously, depending on the work you're doing, you need different levels of protection. I'm not sure if that answers the question you were asking.
Well, are you satisfied with the viability of those which are being used by your members?
Right. What I'm saying is the way you're asking me is they're viable. As a matter of fact, we tested a series of them just recently on the range to see if they still had their ballistic properties, which they do.
How rigorous is your system to monitor deportees with a criminal background? Your officers have been at pains to say there is a system in place.
If you remember, so somebody who's a deportee and comes back to Jamaica, unless there's a charge here for them in Jamaica, they are actually free to go about their business. And a number of them are not involved in criminal activities. When we detect that they may be involved in criminal activities, then they come under scrutiny from our intelligence services. Clearly, some intelligence led us to this one, who was obviously involved in criminal activities and had illegal firearms, and that's why we were there.
Though, Commissioner, because I'm not sure there is a structured system of monitoring in place. I know you have said on more than one occasion that you cannot prosecute if there is no crime here committed by the deportees, but is there a structured system of monitoring?
No, what I'm saying, the monitoring of them is similar. You get addresses, you know where they are. They are not required by law to come in and say where they are. They are free to go pretty much, unless they do something here in Jamaica that they are wanted for. If they join a criminal element in Jamaica, then we treat them similarly to all other criminals, and we monitor them, we try to find them, we build cases against them. I think something just happened.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner, I think the question that was being asked wanted to figure out whether or not the vests issued were sufficient for the purpose. And I think you probably would want to explain that the vests are standard issues, same that will be issued right across.
Thanks, Pierre. So we have, as I say, we have different levels of vests. So our units like our specialized operations, our SWAT team, wear a much heavier vest with a plate, and they have ballistic shields. The police officer who is just about his normal duties and is out there walking up and down for hours and hours in the car, out of the car, and just interfacing with the public, also has a vest, but it will not necessarily stop military-grade rounds from going through it.
So the other issue, Commissioner, would be that the bullet, the weapon that was used was firing military-grade.
That's correct.
Bullets that the standard issue vest would probably not be able to stop.
That's correct. So that's it. You said it, sir. that is it. The point is we did a very aggressive purchasing process over the last year plus, of getting in vests for our members. And for the most part, having gone out, actually, because I spend a fair amount of time on the road interfacing with members, and for the most part, the ones I've come across have been issued with vests.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just to say quickly that the criminals are using high-powered weapons. There are many times military-grade weapons, rifles firing high-velocity rounds. That standard issue or even SWAT issue gear might not always be able to stop. This, unfortunately, was one such case where, from what we have seen, Commissioner, the teams were vested, but some of the bullets may have penetrated.
Yeah, that's what we have seen so far. Again, this is something that we have to, so once you do an operation like this, every aspect of it has to be analyzed to see what happened, what we can change, what we should have done, how can we, from this, better protect our officers and their lives. But certainly we had and have been investing in protection for our officers. No question about that. Thousands of vests have come in.
Thank you so much, sir. Are we on the monitor? All right.
You had a third question, you said, Damien?
Is it that
I just wanted a bit of clarification on the basis of what the commissioner just said a while ago. Am I hearing him saying that the officers wore standard issue vests to this operation, and based on his reconnaissance, it would have required more than the standard issue?
So we actually have to do a debrief on the operation. When I went out there, the officers involved, a lot of them were pretty shook up. We have 2 dead, 2 who are, fighting for their lives. I know one of them, he got shot below the vest in the pelvic region, and so on. So we will have to go through this in some detail, and when we do, we'll put out something on it. I prefer not to go any further on this. Okay?
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Prime Minister, I have a question on, well, an appeal really from persons on social media belonging to the faith community. They're asking, sir, concerning the protocol about no air conditioning. There are some churches apparently that are rented spaces that are enclosed as well, and the door alone will not accommodate. They've asked on social media that you, sir, and the cabinet reconsider.
The chief medical officer is here. I'm not going to put her on the spot, but we will contemplate it, but just bear in mind that so far what we have seen, not just in Jamaica but worldwide, that recirculated air conditioning is one of the factors that promotes the spread, and therefore that has to be carefully considered. You will notice, Naomi, that when we have increased the numbers in our public transportation, we have also said that they must keep their windows down so that there is adequate airflow.
All right, wonderful. And so, sir, that concludes our questions for today. If you would, you could recap.
Sure. We've done it in good time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much to members of the media, members of the public joining us today for another update from Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness. Join us again next week. We'll have another update for the nation. Until then, have a good night and a good weekend.